Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. The Dawa guys are in full-on damage control mode. Many of you are already familiar with what happened last Sunday at Speaker's Corner. There was a huge Christian presence, bigger than anything we've ever really seen before, or at least in a long time, since before I've been there, where the majority of people at Speaker's Corner were no longer Muslims, which is what we usually see, where there are more Muslims compared to any other group. But for this particular day, there was now more Christians than anyone else. This was in part because of a protest where Muslims prior, the week before, had attempted to set a Christian preacher on fire by trying to light a Israel flag that he had around his neck, and decided to grab a Bible and rip it to shreds and throw it on the floor. As you can imagine, Christians weren't very impressed with this, so many Christians descended on Speaker's Corner, proclaiming that Christ is king, and Muslims were basically just sidelined. Now, although Muslims did their absolute best not to engage some of the biggest names in Christian apologetics, with hundreds of thousands of subscribers and an immense amount of social influence on YouTube and TikTok and other platforms, there were some instances where Muslims did actually debate. One instance is Mansur debating Avery, otherwise known as God Logic.
So now tell me, why are you not a Muslim?
I'm not a Muslim because...
Avery, did you say your name is?
Yes, sir.
Avery, I'm Mansur.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. Oh, sorry.
First time here in Speaker's Corner?
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's stay there,
Hold on. Can I, like...
Stay there. Don't forget the cameras. Have a conversation.
This did not go well for him. Let's say it how it is. Mansur struggled immensely in answering a single question, and eventually pretended to be insulted and then walked away. What made this even more worse for Mansur and the Darawise team is the fact that this video currently has around 200,000 views on God Logic's channel. Mansur also put the video up, and as of the time of making this video, it has just under 8,000 views. Obviously, his Muslim fan base didn't really think he did that well, whereas the Christians think that God Logic did incredibly well. This might explain the reason why Mansur has made his latest video, where he explains to the camera why he did so poorly, and he tries to justify his reasons for losing the debate. How do we know this? Because it's over an hour-long video where he just explains and tries to defend himself and excuse his poor behavior and his poor debating skills. But before Mansur gets into this, he starts off by trying to explain the background for exactly what happened last Sunday and why it happened. Let's see what Mansur has to say about this.
If you are feeling very emotional and you feel that you're being offended, then this is not the place for you to go, or even videos for you to watch from Speaker's Corner. Okay. Now, having said that, we have always been working with the authorities there to get those people who are disturbing the peace in Speaker's Corner, to put them through the eyes of justice. If people are committing criminal behavior, they should be appropriately taken care of by the authorities. The police are there constantly, and every week they're there, because the reason being there's constant provocation by certain Christian missionaries, and it seems like this is the only way of preaching their gospel, by provoking the Muslims. And they do that for obviously a reason, and this is not the place to talk about now, but of course, my point being, some Muslims react unacceptably, and they need to be taken care of by the eyes of the law as well, because you should not in any way disturb the peace there or commit any behavior which is a criminal act. And if you do so, you should be really be taken care of by the authorities and under due process, punished if that is the process of the law.
So Mansur does accept that there are violent Muslims at Speaker's Corner, and he's aware that it's an issue, which is refreshing at least, because I've never actually heard Mansur ever condemn this behavior or even talk about it. But I think at this point he's been forced to talk about it because too many Muslims are asking him, why was there so many Christians at Speaker's Corner and why was there a protest? What was the protest about? Why has the Bible been destroyed at Speaker's Corner, and why was a Christian preacher almost set on fire? So he has to acknowledge that actually there is a real issue with Muslims and violence at Speaker's Corner. Now he tries to explain this away by saying, well, we don't engage with that violence, so it's okay. Not only do we not engage with the violence, but we work with the police where, we want the bad people kicked out too. This is, I find, incredibly convenient for Mansur and others. They don't really have to say anything, which is why I think for the most part they haven't said anything other than just recently in this video. It's convenient for them that they have a large Muslim presence that actively gets violent with Christians. It's convenient for them. It scares away Christians. So they're free to prey on the vulnerable new Christians who have no experience debating at Speaker's Corner, and anyone who does have experience with debating, anyone who does know their faith well and is grounded in Christianity, will never talk to them because then they will expose them for how little knowledge they actually have. Mansur also seems to say that these are always just new people that no one knows. They're just random people. Well, in many cases, they are random people. But that's not true. We actually do have frequent Muslims who commit violence frequently, and we know them. We all know them. Even non-Christians know them. The atheists know them. The Jews know them. Everyone at Speaker's Corner knows who these people are. And I'm going to do some shout-outs. So first of all, we have this guy who has repeatedly attacked and pushed people and gotten physical, and that's been captured on camera numerous times, and he is a frequent member of Speaker's Corner who hangs out with Dais.
I'm telling you, I witnessed my immediate family got killed by these people, and then you have the decency to say I don't believe it.
When did I say that? When did I say that?
You just said that right now.
What did I say? You said
Then we have Idris, who has gotten a little bit physical every once in a while, as this video can show you. So yes, he's also a frequent member of Speaker's Corner, and yes, we do know him.
In your hadith, let's say, now notice the pushing, notice the pushing, notice the pushing, notice the pushing. It's all going to get argy-bargy in a minute, and then they'll be trying to blame me. You are pushing, literally pushing, literally pushing. Alex, walk away, bro. Walk away, bro. It's going to get violent. I can bully. There you go.
He's actually alright, like, when he's not amped up. Then we have this guy who has threatened people multiple times and who even headbutted someone, and again we have footage of that, and that was just a few weeks ago. Muslims like Mansur won't ever draw attention to this because they're aware that there actually are people they hang out with, people they associate with who are actually physically violent. So that's disingenuous and completely false coming from Mansur, which is what we would expect at this point. Also, in that very same weekend at Speaker's Corner, there were instances of violence, and guess who they came from? They came from Muslims. One instance was a man who took his belt off and tried to whip people. Let's continue.
So last week, apparently, they came to Reclaim, and they came from America, a group, and this is how we see them reclaiming Speaker's Corner. Just to give you some examples. So there you go. What are they doing? So a group have come. They seem to be, or may have spoken something earlier or something, as you can see. Okay, this is another discussion happening. So as the beginning, as you can see, people have come here. I don't know what they have been taking or smoking earlier on, and that's the way they've been trying to reclaim Speaker's Corner here.
Now, I don't know why Mansur does this, but he's trying to imply that it's bad to chant or to get passionate in a group setting where you're jumping up and down and you're screaming Christ is King, that this is somehow a negative thing. Mansur, this is what Muslims do week in, week out at Speaker's Corner, and have been doing it for years, probably decades. And you're aware of this because you're there and you see it. So not liking it when Christians do it, but liking it when Muslims do it tells me that you're two-faced. You're not trying to be genuine. You're trying to have one face for one group of people and another face for another group of people. It's disingenuous, it's dishonest, and it's two-faced. Funny how Mansur didn't have an issue when Muslims did it, but he has an issue when Christians do it, mainly because he's worried that there's an actual unified Christian presence. And that's a scary thing for Mansur. Now, Mansur actually goes through a few different clips. One of them is the conversation that Siraj had with Anthony Rogers. Another one is a conversation that GodLogic had with Siraj. He also includes one where GodLogic spoke to Sheikh Mohammed. And finally, he has the clip where he debates GodLogic, Avery. But I want to show you just how disingenuous, because he's trying to explain all of these different events and try to smooth them over and be like, hey guys, look, Muslims didn't do that bad if you really think about it. When in reality, the consensus among Christians and Muslims is that they did very poorly. Muslims could not handle these big names from around the world. Anthony Rogers, David Wood. I mean, no one even touched David Wood. I even told Mansur and others, look, David Wood is here. You can debate him and show the entire world and his hundreds of thousands of Christians just how superior Islam is. They weren't interested. What a shame. It's almost as if they know they can't debate. So let's see what Mansur has to say about Anthony Rogers and Siraj.
The term God in Scripture is used in more than one way. Just like the word man can be used in more than one way. Think of the term Adam in the Bible. Adam is the name on the one hand for the race. On the other hand, it's used for the first man. So if I say to you, are you the son of a man? And if I say, are you the son of man, are those the same question?
Okay, great. So Anthony Rogers gives a really good analogy. He compares the fact that the term Adam can be used in different senses. Adam in the sense of referring to the human race, and Adam in the sense of referring to the first person. He then gives an analogy where he says, if I asked you, are you the son of a man? And I asked you, are you the son of man? Have I asked you the same thing? Interesting. That's a really good point. Christians know those two things are very different. Let's see what Mansur has to say about that.
Are you man? Are you the son of a man? I hope the Christians really see the distinction there, because I don't see how this is making a huge distinction here.
What? Do you guys just see what he did? Are you man? Are you the son of a man? No. Anthony Rogers says, are you the son of a man? Are you the son of man? Notice the distinction between the indefinite article and the definite article. Mansur totally butchers this, and as far as I can tell, intentionally changes it as to not properly represent Anthony Rogers at all. Again, he's either being deceptive here, or he just has a comprehension problem. Which one is it, Mansur? Anthony Rogers was very particular and clear with his words, but you can't even give him the benefit of the doubt of quoting him properly.
Yes, Allah the Father. Now, that's the question. Let's see. You're right. He doesn't need to. Let's see if he does, though, because he promised he
Yeah, just let him.
Let's see if he does. Go ahead. Go ahead.
So just some points here. As you can see, he knows. He came to Speaker's Corner knowing who Sheikh Mohammed is. Someone who, Muslims consider him to be a scholar. And he knows that. So he knows how to approach an individual who's respected in the Muslim community, as well as in Speaker's Corner, as someone who's knowledgeable, because he's done his, he's been learned in institutionalized way of learning.
He's been learned in an institutionalized way of learning. Okay, Mansur, that's not correct English. I don't think you realize what you just did there. You mean supposedly Sheikh Mohammed has some form of higher education that he has achieved, therefore he is a person of higher learning. Just to correct your English there. And next, Mansur tries to gloss over GodLogic and Sheikh Mohammed, which was an absolute fire pit of dawah, where GodLogic asks a simple question and Sheikh Mohammed basically just pivots to the Bible immediately, out of fear, presumably. Sheikh Mohammed is one of the least educated persons at Speaker's Corner and simply isn't qualified to do dawah, to be completely honest with you. He can't deal with basic questions that Christians ask. He repeatedly makes very awkward blunders. And Sheikh Mohammed has also been known to be violent at Speaker's Corner. Here's a little clip where he decided to get physical with Bob.
We have to listen to you. Okay. No, I want
Come to this forward. No,
I can move anywhere I want. It's a park. You don't control the park. Whoa, Sheikh, what are we doing? What are we doing, Sheikh? What are we doing?
Mansur, of course, is still associated with Sheikh Mohammed and has not gone to the police to report Sheikh Mohammed. As we have already established, he is two-faced and will say one thing and do another. So now we get to the point where Mansur is defending his own personal failures and the fact that he couldn't even present Islam as a coherent religion, let alone better than Christianity. Let's see what Mansur has to say about this absolute fire pit of dawah with GodLogic.
Those of you who didn't know that this discussion, like Sheikh Mohammed's discussion, ended abruptly for a reason, because the behavior that he was portraying wasn't acceptable to me at all, and we will show to you at the end of this discussion why that was the case. It was pointless to continue any further, because in the spirit of truth and sincerity, that would have been the things to do by any individual, not just myself.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it really does boil down to Mansur feels that he needs to discredit Avery Godlogic by attacking his character, by calling him a man of no integrity, not sincere, so on and so forth, because this is what he does to everybody whom he debates. He has to then retroactively, post the fact, declare them to be someone of poor character. This is called attacking the character. This is what people do when they lose debates and they need to justify why they lost so badly. Why did Mansur run from Godlogic? They were having a discussion and Mansur immediately just switched and went, no, I'm out of here, and ran off, which is traditional in the Dawa scene. But he feels at least the need to explain why, so he doesn't lose face. Both of his faces, presumably. He doesn't want to lose. Keep in mind, whether someone has integrity or is sincere doesn't really determine whether or not you ought to debate them. If you're doing it in a public setting and it would be gratifying for your own audience, or better yet, for the other side's audience, then you should debate anyway, because if they have no integrity and they're not sincere, you can expose them for this during the debate, and you can show them that they're not able to answer your questions. For some reason, Mansur hasn't figured this out and still thinks that if someone is insincere or doesn't have integrity, which is the lowest form of insult possible and nothing more than an excuse for Mansur, this justifies not engaging in a debate, which is weird because he engages with debates with tons of people, many of whom you would assume don't have integrity or aren't sincere, whether from an atheist perspective, an agnostic perspective, a Hindu perspective, or a Christian perspective, and yet that doesn't bother him. I think someone's two-faced again. Telling little porkies when he loses a debate and runs away, it's because they were insincere. When he does really well on camera with a complete newbie who has no experience defending their position, they were very sincere. You see the logic? It's not God logic, it's Mansur logic. Now this is an interesting point. In this next part, Mansur is going to explain why he asked a really dumb question. And he even admits he did this to set Avery up, in effect. And it's incredibly dumb because it's a way of, again, attacking someone's character, not actually in dealing with the argument. So let's see what Mansur does in his amazing Dawa dodge.
Stances in terms of the character integrity, you need to first establish that, because otherwise the question of the subject matter often is not going to be very fruitful. And I'll tell you why this, so you'll realize. So what I did, I stated something just to check this out, okay? And let's listen to his response.
And looked into what this claim Jesus made. Firstly, where has he made this claims? The writings you've read yourself in Greek, in Hebrew, in Aramaic. So you've
as I'm saying, just watch his facial expression. So I said, as an investigator, you would have checked where his writings are, whether it's in Greek, in Hebrew, in Aramaic, and so on. And he's saying, yep, as if he has done so himself. Okay, so let's continue.
I know all these languages and investigated, right?
I've looked into the text.
So if the text is in Greek, I've looked into the Greek text, you've understood it, fine, good. So,
right. So he is trying to be, trying to, in a way, not to be caught fully red-handed. He's saying, yeah, I've looked into the text. But what was my assertion? My assertion was, you have looked into those texts in the original languages, Greek and Hebrew and Aramaic, and understood them.
So notice Mansur set this little trap up where he says, as an investigator, which is weird kind of term to use, really. Notice he makes it personal as well. Rather than just letting scholars speak and people referencing scholars, Mansur wants to make it personal with Avery. He knows full well that there isn't a person out there who's going to be a scholar in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, who also studies apologetics, who also goes to Speaker's Corner. The odds of that happening are 1 in a million, and he's willing to take those odds. And it's interesting, Mansur was hoping Avery would say yes. Avery nods his head and then says, I've studied the text, to elaborate on how he understands Mansur's question. This, I think, kind of annoys Mansur because that's not really what he wanted. He wanted him to make the mistake of just affirming whatever Mansur was saying, but Avery is actually quite clear and he says, look, I've studied the text. What's worse is that you can interpret what Mansur says pretty easy. You can just say, I know these things in the sense that for wherever a Muslim claim is made that Ahmed is mentioned in the prior scriptures, which is exactly what Avery has asked him, just a basic question, I have gone to an interlinear and I have looked at the Hebrew as translated word by word into into English by scholars who know Hebrew so I can confirm whether or not that term actually means Ahmed or is a description of Ahmed. Or it could be referring to the fact that he's familiar with many scholarly opinions and has not found that the dominant position is that Ahmed is mentioned in other texts as a prophecy for one to come after Christ, which again is the case. Most scholars say, no, that's not there. The only scholars who do say that are biased Muslim scholars who are desperately trying to stop dawah from exploding. And just some context for what the discussion is about that Avery is having with Mansur at this point. It's started very simply. Avery, God Logic, asked Mansur a single question. He said, in your Quran, in Surah 61, Ayah 6, it says that Ahmed is prophesied to come after Christ. Can you show me in any scriptures or any books, basically, where it says that? Because I don't find it, therefore it seems that the Quran is an error and God cannot make errors. That was the summary of his position. Notice Mansur has this very high target for who he's debating with, which, as far as he's concerned, is a complete nobody who, this is their first time in Speaker's Corner. This may be very well their first time even debating this. But he nonetheless says that in order to answer this question, Avery first yes, I know it somehow brought back to Avery. Avery first needs to be an expert in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic before he even begins to look into this, because otherwise he cannot be a sincere investigator. See, again, attacking Avery's character right from the very beginning. But notice he actually doesn't apply the same standard to himself or any Muslim who does the same thing. If a Muslim, say for example Mansur, comes across Surah 61 Ayah 6 or Surah 7 157 and asks, I wonder where I can find these things that are prophesied in previous scriptures. To which then he decides to become an investigator and to look into this. According to Mansur, the only way he could ever do that is if he knew Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, which of course he doesn't. So what does that mean? Well, it means that Mansur, by his own standards, is not an investigator and has never investigated this issue, and yet he's now debating someone on it. In other words, Mansur's own criteria for what it takes to be able to answer this question, he himself doesn't meet, which means that he himself is not a sincere investigator of this question, and he himself has not looked at the evidence. But yet he's debating with Avery about why he's wrong in his own investigation. Avery actually has looked at this. Mansur, I don't think, has at all. I mean, by his own standards, he couldn't even begin to look at it. So Mansur has just argued himself out of the debate. He's basically said, I'm not even qualified to even begin to look at this question. Again, this is two-faced. The requirements he sets for his opponent are not the same requirements he himself plays by, because he's not being honest. Are we surprised, ladies and gentlemen, at this point?
And he should not just only have a biased belief that New Testament is the only book that contains all the statements of Jesus Christ, what he said and what he did, and they're all reliable. Because if you've taken that for granted, they're reliable and authentic, and it contains all of Jesus Christ's statements and so on, then you are not a good investigator, because this is coming from a preconceived belief from system. A good investigator has skepticism.
Wait, what was that? A preconceived belief from system. What? Preconceived... Mansur, I haven't really realized until watching your content quite thoroughly now that you really have a comprehension problem with English. Some of the things you say just sort of come out of nowhere and aren't actually complete sentences that are grammatically correct. Preconceived from system? I'm not sure what you meant to say there. I think what you're trying to say, Mansur, is you cannot just assume that everything in the New Testament is fully complete of all the things that Jesus has ever said. You need to instead give evidence for that belief and not just take it a priori as a matter of fact. I think that's what you were trying to say in English. Of course, Mansur tries to pivot to the Bible as fast as physically possible because talking about Islam is dangerous, because we all know Islam is a faulty and crumbling belief system at this point that is on fire, apparently. So he starts to talk about the Bible and tries to make a false comparison because that's all he really has, as well as using some interesting English.
Oh, what did we see here? He has shot himself in his own arguments.
So, shot yourself in your own arguments. No, Mansur, I believe you're trying to use an English idiom. An idiom is an expression that we use that is well known and understood by a community. For example, those that live in the UK. The idiom I think you're trying to use is you shot yourself in the foot. Shooting yourself in the foot is an idiom that essentially means that what you wanted to do did not have the intended effect that you had planned, but rather has backfired against yourself. Shooting yourself in your own arguments is not an idiom that is commonly recognized at all or a commonly used expression. Just so you know, Mansur.
This is precisely what this argument takes him. it makes him into a Christian apostle, or we take him outside his faith, because
Okay, Mansur, I'm sorry, but I think your English is perhaps not as good as I previously thought. You said it would make him a Christian apostle. No, Mansur, you see, an apostle for us is someone who was called by Christ to go out and proclaim the gospel. I think the word you're trying to use is apostate. Apostate is someone who leaves their religion. Like in Islam, when you leave the religion, you are told by Muhammad that you have to kill that person. Yes, Mansur, that's your religion. That's what you believe.
because if someone is dishonest, not truthful, then they will bring in things which are not necessarily true and correct, because it's all about a show and theatrics. They'll try to, fool you and deceive you with their erroneous replies and arguments.
Now, Mansur, you talking about theatrics and how everything is just a show is a classic example of what we call projection. You are, without a doubt, one of the most theatrical people that is at Speaker's Corner. The way that you speak, the way that you move, the way that you address the audience rather than the person is a classic example of theatrics. Which is interesting why you use that word about Avery, given that's what you do. And again, when a Christian is ever so slightly theatrical, then this is something he immediately condemns. But if he does it as his standard way of giving dawah, it's completely acceptable. Why does he hold these two opposing views? It's because he is two-faced. He isn't able to present a coherent view. He changes his view depending on the context of who is speaking. If a Christian does it, it must be bad. If a Christian is chanting, that must be bad. If a Christian is being theatrical, that must be bad. If a Christian interrupts, that must be bad. But if Mansur is being theatrical, that's good. If Muslims are chanting, that's good. If Muslims interrupt in an argument, that's also good. Notice how he has these two opposing views that he can't reconcile, because if he did, he would be exposed. So how does Mansur deal with the fact that Avery has pointed out that Ahmed is not actually found in anywhere as a supposed prophet to come after Christ? He shifts the burden of proof on the idea that it's up to Avery as the investigator to go through all the material and to find the name. But of course this is disingenuous, because Avery actually only has to do one simple thing. He simply needs to say, no scholar has ever found this. Show me a single scholar that has said that Ahmed can be found somewhere in the documents of antiquity. But of course Mansur knows that that's not possible because he hasn't been found, because it's not there. Hence why the Quran is false, because we have a reasonable expectation to find that, given that the Quran claims that this is something that the people at the time of Muhammad knew about. In fact, if you read tafsir on the Quran, when it talks about these kind of verses that mention a prophet to come, who is supposedly Muhammad, the whole context in the Hijaz, according to the tafsirs of these expert scholars, say that this was well known among the Jews and Christians. They knew that Muhammad was this person who was supposedly meant to come. They just denied it and pretended it wasn't happening because they didn't want to acknowledge it. So the Quran actually makes multiple claims that Muhammad is prophesied going back to the time of Christ, and indeed in the Torah, and the Jews and Christians at the time of Muhammad knew about this and were fully aware that Muhammad was that person. We also know from the Quran, plain and simply, Surah Al-Baqarah ayah 41 says that the Jews and Christians had the scriptures that were given to Isa and Musa, the Torah and the Injil, with them at the time of Muhammad. Even one of the verses that talks about Muhammad being prophesied, Surah 7, Ayah 157, says that Muhammad is prophesied in the text, the scriptures that they have with them, that are written. So the Injil and the Torah are indeed present at the time of Muhammad and supposedly do include prophetic statements about Muhammad coming. Therefore, we can reasonably assume that the evidence should be easy to find, given that this Injil and Torah is spread throughout the world, so it should be very easy to find it. And given that we have manuscripts that even predate the time of Muhammad, we know exactly what the Injil and Torah was even before that time, hundreds of years prior. So Mansur doesn't really have anywhere to go with this. His argument falls flat on its face by trying to shift the burden of proof to Avery to basically do a bizarre inductive argument of find every single piece of antiquity to prove that Muhammad wasn't written on it, which is a completely foolish standard that no one would ever be held to, let alone someone who, in Mansur's words, doesn't know Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic. It shows that Mansur is being disingenuous. He knows that this isn't a criteria that he could meet, or most Muslims couldn't meet, but he expects Avery to because he's losing this debate, so quick, come up with arbitrary criteria and sound really impressive when you do it. But unfortunately, he comes off being quite dim. So Mansur starts to panic and he starts to think, I know, I can make this better. Okay, so we know that Muhammad or Ahmed is not found in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Damn. Or the Torah. Okay, damn, that's difficult. What do? I know I'll just list lots of different apocryphal gospels and just hope that it's in one of them. The irony is that Ahmed is not mentioned in any of them. In fact, the only one that Muhammad is actually mentioned in is the Gospel of Barnabas, which is a Muslim forgery where Muslims tried to fake their own gospels to include the name of Muhammad because they were fully aware that their religion was a lie and Muhammad was lying when he said that he was prophesied. So they made a gospel. Sometime during the 13th or 14th century in Spain, which is an interesting place to write gospels, and then try to pass it off as an actual genuine gospel that had Muhammad's name mentioned and prophesied. So Muslims actually have a history of attempting to produce fake gospels to save Islam. Other than the obvious fake production attempt that Muslims engaged in a few centuries ago, nothing else has Ahmed or Muhammad prophesied in it. So by Mansur listing all these additional gospels, all he's actually doing is just pointing out how obvious it is that Muhammad is never referenced. Muhammad is not only not referenced in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, or the Torah, he's also not referenced in the Gospel of Eid, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Bartholomew, the Gospel of the 70, the Gospel of the Ebionites, the Gospel of... and so on and so on. He's just made his case even worse. He's accidentally just explained that even the heretics didn't think this. So, thank you for that, Mansur. That's helped quite significantly. Just in case you haven't figured out yet, this debate could have gone a lot easier if it went something like this. Hi Mansur, can you show me any evidence where Ahmed or Muhammad is mentioned in prior scriptures as a prophet to come after Christ? Sure, Avery, I can do that. Here's where it's mentioned. That would have taken about 5 seconds and the debate would have already been over. But of course Mansur can't be honest about that, the fact that there is no evidence for this, so it is almost certainly a lie in the Quran. So he has to waffle and turn it back to the Bible somehow, because the Quran stands on the Bible. In every sense of the term apparently, because the Quran simply cannot be defended without referencing something else. So how did Mansur manage to get out of this dumpster fire of a debate? Well, he did the classic, you have offended me, therefore my feelings are hurt, and I'm going to have to go take a big lie down now, because I just don't know what to do with myself since I've been so badly offended. Classic Mansur. So Mansur asks Avery, do you have a problem letting people speak? Which is not really a question, it's a hypothetical question if anything, and it is more of a point or a statement to accuse Avery of not being able to listen. Avery then responds with, no, I have a problem with people lying. But here's the interesting thing. If you look at the footage, Mansur interrupts God logic throughout the debate. He interjects little words, he asks questions while Avery is speaking, and Avery never really says that's an issue. So it seems that Mansur sets a standard that yes, interrupting is totally fine. But then, of course, at the key moment, Mansur all of a sudden waits for him to interrupt and then says, oh, do you have a problem with letting people speak? As if to pretend that he hasn't been doing the same thing. Mansur has been doing the same thing. Let's watch the footage.
Salvation of Christ. So we do find them by name. So wait. So pause. Look, here's the thing.
Don't make claims.
Here's
have a discussion.
No, yeah, this
Engage
is.
with me.
It says that elsewhere in 7157 that we find them written. Okay, that it doesn't by name.
Do you have the
But
Bible?
61. Just give me yes. Good look.
Can I answer?
Look. Let me tell you.
Do you have
why.
a verbal diarrhea?
Let me tell you why. Let me
He
tell
has
you
a
why.
verbal diarrhea.
Let me tell you
He
why,
can't
Mansur.
finish asking the question.
Of course.
He has to repeat it a million times.
Of course.
So what does this mean? It means that Mansur is being two-faced. He has an issue with being interrupted, but he doesn't have an issue with interrupting others. He instead waits for them to do what he's been doing so that he can take offense to them doing it, so he can use it as an excuse to leave. And what happens? Exactly that.
Do you have a problem of letting people speak?
I have a problem of letting people lie. I'm trying to help you be on track.
You just called me a liar.
Yes, I do.
End of discussion.
He couldn't tell me what the NGO was.
He calls me a liar. He should have at least have.
After you tried to insult my intelligence, after you insulted my intelligence, and now you can dish out what you can't take.
Excuse me.
You can dish out what you can't take.
Look. I'm not interested in speaking to someone who accused people of lying.
But you accuse me of having memory problem, of messing up your words. So you can insult my intelligence, but I can't say that you're a liar.
Is there anyone else
You're a liar.
who's capable to speak about?
Is there anybody else who's a Muslim that can tell me where the heck can I find Jesus saying Ahmed?
Anyone?
Any Muslim? Any Muslim? All right, take care. All right, guys. Say bye. Say bye. Bye. Bye.
Avery says that Mansur is lying because Mansur is saying that Avery has never been interrupted by him through this debate or has not been interrupted by him repeatedly. But the footage shows that Avery was interrupted by Mansur. What does that mean? It means that Mansur did indeed interrupt. And by Mansur deflecting and trying to say that actually I'm not, Avery is appropriately calling him out for that by saying, look, you're lying about this. You're trying to say that I am just interrupting you and you haven't been doing the same when in fact you have been. But regardless, Mansur takes the opportunity to flee, and the remaining footage is Mansur running away because that's all he has left. And this debate was significant because Mansur didn't know who Avery was. He didn't realize that Avery was actually very well informed. So when Mansur gets into a debate with a well-informed person, it really doesn't go well for this guy. He's not able to explain things properly. He could have just been honest and said, well, as of yet, we don't have any evidence for Ahmed or Muhammad being referenced in previous scriptures, even though the expectation is that there ought to be, given the fact that it was so commonly used at the time of Muhammad as an argument for Muhammad's prophethood. But that would be admitting too much. So Mansur goes on a big tirade about how there's so many gospels, hey, maybe it was written somewhere, but we don't know. But of course that leads to inductive absurdity. It's like saying, prove to me there isn't a three-legged duck. Well, I can't do that because in order for me to prove that, I have to go around checking every single duck to figure out whether or not they have 3 legs, which of course no one can practically do, and hence why to ask for that kind of level of verification by induction is absurd. Mansur knows this, but he has no problem asking for it anyway. Just don't expect him to actually do that. And there you are, ladies and gentlemen. They did the classic post-debate video where they try and explain things because the Muslims are getting shaky and realizing that their Dawah guys actually don't know as much as they thought they knew and that they're mostly just being two-faced, like Mansur is in this video. And let's be honest, GodLogic's video has almost 200,000 views. It's probably going to be higher than that eventually after a week or so. They can't deal with the fact that Muslims are being woken up to the issues in Islam that cannot be reconciled, that prove that the Quran is an error, that prove that Islam is fundamentally false, and that Muhammad was not the person they think he was. He was not a prophet, nor was he prophesied in any scriptures at any point. And all evidence tells us this, and yet those Muslims are desperate for that evidence to be explained away. Mansur is unable to do this. That's why Mansur doesn't debate basically anyone. If he knew who Avery was ahead of time, he would never have spoke to him. This, in effect, is a giant mistake on Mansur's part. He debated someone he shouldn't have debated according to his own rules. Rules of engagement that he talks about. So I'm going to put a list on this side of the screen. I'm going to put a list of all the people that Mansur will never, ever debate with. Ever. And you may say, well, maybe some of these people are just really rude or so on and so forth. You can only say that for so long until you realize that the list keeps growing and growing and growing and growing. And then at some point you have to realize it's because Mansur has accepted that he cannot debate these things. Mansur has retired from debating. He simply preys on vulnerable new Christians at Speaker's Corner who have no debate experience, and he preys on them in a very predatory fashion so that the cameramen will swarm around them in a very gang-like style and take advantage of them so that they can mock and ridicule them on the internet. This is the level of character of Mansur. And just for reference, if you're in any kind of doubt, Mansur happens to be one of the rudest debaters at Speaker's Corner. I'm going to clip some footage to show you some of those classic examples. Like that time he randomly pushed someone.
Then I can answer the question.
Well, instead of being patronising...
I'm not patronising it.
Patronising
No, I'm not. Don't be offended. Don't be offended. Because the moment people say, what do you mean by that?
Okay, I'll put it back to you and you can give me your answer.
Yeah.
Do you exist?
I do.
How do you know?
Because Mansur doesn't hold himself accountable for his own words, he only holds others accountable. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this has been this video exposing Mansur for being two-faced, for not being consistent, and for having the veracity to try to posthumously explain his poor debate performance simply because he refused to admit he has lost a debate. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you're new here and you're not a Christian, then today is the day. You can email me with any questions you have about the Christian faith at chris@speakerscorner@gmail.com. And as always, God bless you all and have a really great day. That includes you, Mansur. You have a great day too. God bless. Take care.